Hi, this is Adam Elio Berkowitz from Israel 365 News, coming at you live from the Golan Heights, where all the fun is. Last week we did a video about the Third Temple, whether or not, according to Christianity, it's the temple of the Antichrist. We spoke to John Enarson, a really amazing person. He's the Christian Relations Director for Cry for Zion, an organization that works for Jewish rights on the Temple Mount. And we brought him back because the subject was of such interest to our listeners, and we appreciate your feedback. We brought him back to talk about the Christian role in the Third Temple and what you can be doing now to prepare for that. John, I'd like you, if you could, give us a quick recap on the Temple of the Antichrist, how that fits into Christianity, and how it applies or does not apply to the Third Temple. I'm going to put a link in at the bottom after the broadcast is over so that people can see the full interview. It's a large subject. It's a very large part of Christian theology that needs to be addressed in full. So John, give us a quick recap of the Temple of the Antichrist and how that applies to the Jewish Third Temple.
Thanks for having me back. Yeah, last time I didn't say so explicitly, but the summary of it all is to say that the so-called Temple of the Antichrist is a completely unbiblical term. Like, it doesn't appear in the New Testament at all. For Christians, it's the temple of God. It's supposed to be. Jesus called it my heavenly Father's house. He loved it, and Paul calls it the temple of God, not the temple of Antichrist. And that's the biggest misconception, is that people have this view that that the Third Temple might be built for the Antichrist or something like that. So regardless how you look at prophecy, it doesn't matter. Biblically, it's the temple of God. It's holy to him. It's a net positive. And, the main prefiguring that Christians really need to look at is the story of Hanukkah. That is the main paradigm we have in Christianity for the figure of the Antichrist. And he is not a Jew. He's a foreigner. He's a Greek pagan who defiles the temple and tries to get people to fall away from the true belief in God. So yeah, Temple of Antichrist, completely unbiblical term and unbiblical concept. We also hit on, I've thought about some amazing points that Josh Wander was making, that in Jewish perspective from the Bible, the Third Temple is eternal. It's not destroyed again. And I just thinking about that and looking at the New Testament, I can't see anywhere where it suggested that the Third Temple would be destroyed either. The Second Temple certainly wasn't under Antiochus and the Hanukkah story. So I thought those were really.
By the way, that includes that is the epicenter of the Third Commonwealth, which we are living today. The Third Commonwealth having to be the modern state of Israel and the Jewish people returning to their homeland after 2,000 years in exile.
Yeah, and the main article that's been really going around lately, one of them is called "I'm looking for the Fourth Temple." In other words, now the Third Temple that might be rebuilt now before the final redemption would disappear and make way for Ezekiel's temple or something like that. But I don't see any source that would say that a third temple would be destroyed anywhere. It might be expanded or renovated into the kingdom era of the King Messiah. But I think it's completely unbiblical concept to talk about the temple of Antichrist or talk about, I want the fourth temple, not the third.
If I can, when it comes to speaking about the temple, as a Jew, I very much connect to the concept of the temple, the first, second, and the third temple. However, there are a lot of Jews who turn it into an allegory, and they seem to think that the exile Judaism based around the synagogue replaced that, or that there's got to be there's a lot of disputes within Judaism about it, which actually we're not going to relate to today. I'll bring on a different expert for that. But I'm wondering, as a devout Christian, how does the Second Temple fit into Christianity? Is this a topic that Christians should be intensely interested in?
I think so, absolutely. I mean, the Second Temple, if you look at the main figures that Christianity has, like Jesus or Paul or the apostles, they were all very positive to the Second Temple in their lives. Paul, like we mentioned, he brought sacrifices, including sin sacrifices in the book of Acts, chapter 21, well into his career. Jesus loved the temple. The apostles made it their headquarters in the center of Jerusalem. They didn't go somewhere else and build a cathedral, you know? So there's that. But then secondly, I didn't make this clear last time. I talked about what I think Christians should believe out from the New Testament. But you guys are absolutely right that Christianity has a problem with replacement theology. And that definitely concerns the temple. A byproduct of replacement theology, which is the view of the temple, and that's the biggest problem, really, I think, in Christianity when it comes to the temple. It's the last stronghold of replacement theology, is Christianity's view of the temple. Some Christians would definitely believe rebuilding the temple, having a third temple, as very problematic, some sort of affront to God. And
as a threat to Christianity,
a threat to Christian theology, or like maybe not a threat, but like, oh, that's deceptive. That's, God is done with Judaism. Rebuilding the temple would mislead a lot of people to think that God is not done with Judaism, because the big sign in history that God is done with Judaism is that the Second Temple was destroyed. He allowed it to be destroyed. So, rebuilding it again would kind of put, this is the same thing that Christianity had a really difficult time with the rebirth of Israel, because replacement theology said, that we are the new Israel, the church is the new Israel, and having the biblical Israel, come to life from the dead was really problematic for that theology.
The Vatican had a very difficult time, it still has a very difficult time recognizing the state of Israel because of that specific reason. And from 1948 for 19 years, until 1967, they came up with the idea that yes, the Jews have come back to Israel, but they don't have Jerusalem. They don't have the complete Jerusalem. They don't have the Temple Mount. In 67, that changed, as we all know, and then they had to revise their theology again to try to understand how this is possible that the Jews have not only come back, but they've also come back to Jerusalem and have returned to the Temple Mount. Of course, that'll be even more when the temple is rebuilt.
It's interesting you mentioned that, Josh, because my understanding, and I could be wrong because I just know about Judaism and not nearly enough about that, is that the Vatican was actually a physical attempt to recreate the temple. It was a physical manifestation of replacement theology based on the temple. They made a new temple with a lot of the aspects of the service, the Ketoret, the incense. I always joke that the guy with the little kippah is the yarmulke on his head is the Pope, and they have, and a lot of the aspects of the Vatican are based on the temple. It is a physical replacement theology, and the interesting thing about Protestantism is they don't have the temple. Would that be accurate, John?
So they don't try to physically recreate aspects of the temple. The historical churches might burn incense or so on, and Protestants would view that as really problematic. But if we're talking about historically, the implements of the symbols of replacement theology, it really took off in the 300s, in the 4th century. So you had this shift away from Jerusalem. God was done with Jerusalem. Now the center is in Rome. And then Constantine starts to remake Jerusalem. and builds the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which I believe was even way bigger than it is today. And that was like the new temple of the new Israel in a new remade Jerusalem. And the Temple Mount was left in the dustbin of history. And that's deeply unbiblical, and really the big historical developments of replacement theology becoming culturally expressed in Roman Christianity.
Another interesting fact is Mount Zion, which in the Torah, in the Bible, Mount Zion is obviously referring to the Temple Mount. But today, Mount Zion is a mountain that is to the southwest of the Temple Mount. People claim that that's where King David is buried, and there are many churches on that property. And some have said have dated that back historically to the Byzantines when they wanted to divert the attention from the Temple Mount itself. So they changed the name from Mount Zion from the Temple Mount to Mount Zion and this hill that's further, like I said, to the southwest. We have an interesting question coming from Facebook from Paul Dawson. He's quoting a passage in Zechariah, a famous passage that's very dear to my heart because I live on the Mount of Olives, about a huge earthquake which is going to split our mountain in half. And then he says in the final question, how do you expect the third temple to survive this? Now, I have my own answer, but I'd like to hear John.
That's a good question. That's a really good question. I love that question.
That's a passage that's very dear to my heart and to many Christians as well. And the thing is, that's mere speculation. At the same time, it only says that that the Mount of Olives would split, and we're talking about Mount Zion, Mount Moriah, the Temple Mount, that not being harmed. I think if you're talking about a future third temple, if it were to be destroyed again, it would seem that would be significant enough to mention in prophecy. Like you see all over with the destruction of the first temple. It was prophesied many times, but we have no indication about the third temple being destroyed. So I don't see why that would be. That's just mere speculation then. But what do you think?
I would have a different answer. Yeah, I think that first of all, it's not clear what chronologically when this is going to happen. So my feeling has always been that this earthquake that is going to split the Mount of Olives is going to happen previous to the rebuilding of the third temple, and it's going to lead up to the building of the third temple. So it's not going to. It may destroy. Everybody that is of the Islamic faith is welcome to cover their ears. It may destroy whatever's up there now, giving way to the third temple. In fact, we see that there is scientifically a fault that goes through the Temple Mount, through the Mount of Olives, and then through the Temple Mount. It was last active about a century ago in 1927, where there was a huge earthquake epicentered in Jericho, and it came through to the Temple Mount and actually knocked off the roof from Al-Aqsa Mosque, and it exposed what we know today to be the cedar beams that were probably from the Second Temple period. And we have lots of evidence of that, and it's very possible that will happen again. And like I said, I see it as making way for the rebuilding of the third temple, not something that's going to happen after. But again, chronologically, it's not clear when these things are going to occur.
That is an incredible piece of history that many people don't know, that in the early 1900s, there was an earthquake and the Al-Aqsa Mosque was badly damaged. And, like I remember just a few years ago sitting in Hebrew class in Jerusalem, and there being a Richter scale level 4 earthquake in Jerusalem, 4+, and a 6-foot hole opened up on the Temple Mount, So, but I think the main thing is that the third temple is coming. We don't know exactly how. I don't know how politically it would happen now, but biblically, for all those who believe the Bible, it's coming. The question to me is, are Christians ready for that? If you look at the destruction of Israel, the temple was destroyed in year 70. The city was destroyed in year 135. And then the land was laid desolate by the Romans as much as possible. If you look at the restoration of Israel, the land was restored in 1948. The city was restored in 1967. It looks like we're headed up for a pretty strong trajectory towards the restoration of the Temple Mount. So I think it's, if God is faithful, which he has shown himself to be, then the Temple Mount will be restored. the question is, how are Christians going to handle that theologically? Not only that, are they going to be involved with something that God is doing, like Christian Zionists were?
If I can point out, the first time we connected, John, was when Cry for Zion ran an amazing conference. There was some amazing stuff going on there. How long ago was that conference?
2 years ago. So it was meant to be a biannual conference with another one this December, but Corona happened.
Yeah, so that conference I was an outsider. It was a conference held in Jerusalem, and it was intended to engage Christians in the concept of the third temple. And I met a few Christians like Joe Good, who are intensely engaged in the temple concept and the third temple. But a lot of Christians felt that it was outside of their theology. There's some people like Tommy Waller of Hayuvel. He takes his people up to the Temple Mount all the time. He feels it's an essential part of Christians connecting to Israel. And apparently you do too. How do you see Christians engaged in the third temple? Is this necessary for them? What are the implications, and how can they do that?
So I compare it to two things for Christians and for myself, really, which is the first is look at the life of Jesus. We're supposed to be his followers. And he was passionately zealous for the Temple Mount and for the house of God on Mount Zion, and all his followers as well, if you re-examine, the New Testament. So that's, first of all, like, we're supposed to, our, claimed for existence is to be like him. So what was he like when it comes to the temple? And then secondly, is I look at the restoration of Israel and how Christian Zionists were involved, saying, look, the Bible says that Israel will be restored. In the 1800s, Christians were very active, as they were called Christian restorationists, being called the father of Zionism, even a Christian, and helping the redemptive process in history. So I think that should also be what Christians' position towards the Temple Mount should be. So I take Christians to the Temple Mount. And the main thing that our organization practically is involved with is, I don't know what's going to happen with the temple or how that's going to happen, but I know something very basic and practically that should happen today, immediately. And that is Jewish prayer should be allowed on the Temple Mount now. Legally, even with the mainstream Western view of human rights and freedom of expression, or even the UN, Charter on Human Rights, all of that, and Israel's Supreme Court, their peace deals with Jordan, with the law of the land, Jews should have full rights to pray on the Temple Mount right now.
In my tours that I give of the old city, I always mention that this is part of the what is known as, what I refer to as, Israel's apartheid system. Many people are referring to another apartheid system when they're referring to the military occupation of Judea and Samaria, but I'm specifically referring to a very, very concerning situation on the Temple Mount. I did a film with a friend of mine who is Muslim and Christian, and we went, all three of us, towards one of the gates of the Temple Mount, and the guards looked at our three identification cards, and they said, the Muslim is welcome to go through, but the Christian and the Jew, they have to stay behind. They're not allowed, because most of the gates are not accessible to Jews. That's
when you talk about the Western pluralistic values that should be expressed up there. A lot of people don't realize, I try to say this sometimes, but it gets a little confusing, that when we're talking about religious rights on the Temple Mount, we're not talking about the rights of the Jews to turn the place into a synagogue. That's not the prophecy. The prophecy is that it'll be a house of prayer for all nations. And if it was anti-Jewish, so they would make a rule Jews can't pray up there, but also Christians cannot pray up there. And Josh touched on something very interesting, that Jews and Christians, if you and I, John, if we went up to the Temple Mount together, God willing, one day, we would not be allowed to enter together. They do not only once I managed, we got special permission to go up with a group, Jews and Christians together. I was up there once, and a Christian friend of mine, who's she's Asian, and she's an online pastor, and she saw me up there, and she comes running across, oh, Eliyahu, and all of a sudden the Waqf police and the Israeli police showed up, and we couldn't go near each other. It is not a matter of, it's not even a matter of, it's interesting, it's not really a matter of Western pluralistic values. They do not want a house of prayer for all nations.
I think definitely the battle is definitely spiritual. So for people who don't understand what's actually going on, is that there are 10, there's 10 plus gates to the Temple Mount, and Muslims can go in and out whenever they want, nearly throughout all the gates with minimal to no security. Whereas there's only one gate where non-Muslims may enter, Christians, Jews, and tourists. And Jews may not, and Christians may not bring a Bible. They may not read a Bible up there. They may not pray.
Specific times of the day that they're very restricted. They get a whole lecture about what they're allowed and what they're not allowed to do, as not to appease, I guess the. I have a surprise.
No drinking for Jews up there.
Right.
No drinking water.
I have a surprise for you. This might even surprise you because we're speaking about the third temple, and I have a little clip here I want to play for you, and I want to hear your reaction. This clip, just to give you some background, is a short video clip of the former mayor of Jerusalem, Teddy Kollek, who was known to be anti-religious, definitely not a religious man, and the first prime minister of Israel, David Ben-Gurion, speaking. I just saw this clip for the first time this week, and I was blown away. So I don't know if you've seen this before, but definitely should see this. Can you guys see this?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And what about the mosque where once the temple stood? Well, until Mashiach will come, you will mention. Well, I fully agree.
Okay, for those of you that missed what was said here, the mayor of Jerusalem asks the prime minister, the first prime minister, David Ben-Gurion, what about the mosque that's up there now? What are we going to do about that? And Ben-Gurion answers him, when the Messiah comes, then we can deal with that. So and Teddy Kollek answers, and I fully agree with that. So he was saying it jokingly because neither of them probably believed in the Messiah, but then they thought, this is never going to happen. But it's interesting to hear, such.
I have a feeling that if they were around today and the Mashiach showed up, they'd be like, "Oh no, we didn't really mean it. Let's not build it anyway." They were not fans of the Third Temple under any circumstances.
But practically speaking, okay, so let's talk about what Christians can do today.
Yeah.
Is the following. The legal standard is that there's extreme discrimination going on, primarily towards Jews, but also towards Christians. And the historical record alone of nearly every major biblical character, from the prophets, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, David, everyone prayed on this location. Even the life of Jesus alone should be enough to guarantee Jewish religious expression on the Temple Mount. Historically, Jews were first, Christians were second, and Muslims were third. And, that should be reflected on the site. And so Christians can support and should support, that's what Cry for Zion is all for, to support Jewish rights for expressing prayer on the Temple Mount. And I know that nearly every Jewish temple organization, their motto is a house of prayer for all nations. But we can, as Christians, we can fully trust the Jewish people to administer that. I mean, look at the Temple Mount. The Western Wall. It's in Jewish hands and Jewish administration, and Jews have primary rights there. But everyone is welcome to come and pray. The whole world is used to seeing people come and pray and visit the Western Wall. Why not on the Temple Mount? Respectfully, I would add. So that's what should happen and can happen today. And people who are alarmists and say it'll be the Third World War, I mean, they need to look at applying sovereignty, what's happened historically in modern history with applying sovereignty to the Golan Heights, with applying sovereignty to Jerusalem, moving the embassy to Jerusalem. It's not World War III.
No, I have a lot of, I get a lot of inspiration from Christian pilgrims, and I really think it is a pilgrimage when Christians come to Israel. I certainly do not share their faith. However, I'm inspired by it, and I respect it enormously. And I'd love to see. I remember once I went with a friend, and we saw. Is it? I don't believe Christians do the Via Dolorosa thing. I don't know. I really don't know.
Historical churches do Via Dolorosa. It's like
I was blown away at how intense the experience
was.
was.
It's the #1 Christian site in all of Israel. I know you're in the Golan Heights. You don't know what's going on down here in Jerusalem, but it's very
I don't know what's going around.
Not for evangelicals, though.
Oh, okay.
Not for evangelicals.
Okay, no. But it's so inspiring, and I just try to. I can't imagine why Christians would not go up to the Temple Mount, where Jesus had so many really important, significant experiences. Why they would not go up there to literally walk in his footsteps. And I would love to see it, to be honest.
That's changing. That's changing. Yeah, because people have asked us for statistics and how is it changing and so on. And it really is changing. So it's reflecting, I think, the awareness and the time that we're living in redemption is that the Jewish people, of course, the numbers are ascending quickly. You're going from like 20 people visiting on Tisha B'Av, 20 Jews on the anniversary of the temple's destruction, ascending, maybe in 2014 or somewhere like that. And now it's up to 1,1800, upwards to 2,000 Jews ascending on the anniversary of the temple's destruction.
Last week, John, I have another surprise for you. We did it. I don't know if we posted that video. Last week, usually the Western Wall is very crowded, full of prayers constantly, 24 hours a day. We got a video last week of a person ascending the Temple Mount, going up what's known as the Mughrabi ramp, to the Mughrabi gate, and he's looking down, videoing of the Western Wall Plaza, completely empty, not one prayer service due to the corona. And they went up in a group to the Temple Mount, and they had a prayer service, an afternoon prayer service, a mincha service on the Temple Mount when there was nothing at the Western Wall at all. So times are definitely changing.
Yes, they are. And for Christians, talking about that. So I'm going to see if I can find the stats right here. But this is from what's reported from the Minister of Internal Security, from what I can see. And it was that 180,000 Christians and tourists, which most tourists are Christian to Israel. And as far as I understand, and 180,000 of them used to ascend in around 2014 annually. That number is nearly up to 700,000 before Corona. Okay.
Oh my goodness.
So this is changing fast. And it's important, and that's what we want. We take people and show them the Temple Mount and show them the importance of Jewish history, of Christian history, of Jewish rights, of everyone. I mean, the entire Bible. It's the epicenter of the whole Bible. Everyone prayed there. Everyone has visited there. It's just been off the map. It's been associated with crazies and people who want to blow up the Dome of the Rock. Instead of really focusing on what it's all about. It's the house of God. It's the holiest place in the world.
If I'm not mistaken, if a Christian goes up and pulls out a Christian prayer book or a New Testament, they generally get some flack. They'll be detained. They'll be detained. They'll be actually. I know that there are Christians who go up now, like Tommy Waller, who's actually treated like a Jew.
Yeah.
They so far as the security checks. Can a Christian go up to the Temple Mount wearing a cross? Do you know?
Absolutely not. And at the same time, I would advise Christians, like at the Western Wall, the cross can be a pretty offensive symbol because of the Crusades and everything like that. So Christians generally don't show up at the Western Wall wearing crosses either. But, as far as discrimination in a modern sense is concerned, yeah, people can get arrested. But here's the thing, right? It's like, I try to tell, and this changes, like you mentioned, some Christian groups like Tommy Waller, we are in solidarity with the Jewish people and the discrimination that the Jewish people receive on the Temple Mount. And that's because we're starting to reject replacement theology and to treat the site as sacred and holy to God again. So I would challenge Christians to think about this. When you're on the Temple Mount, there were places that Jesus would not walk as a Jew on the Temple Mount. He was not from the priestly tribe of Levi or from the family of Aaron. There were sections of the Temple Mount that he would not walk. And he said, when he was speaking about prophecy, that it will be trampled upon by the Gentiles, by the nations, until the time of the nations is fulfilled. So as Christians and his followers, do we want to be up there on the Temple Mount contributing to being Gentiles and nations, trampling on the areas that he would not have trampled on, that Paul would not have trampled on? And these are things that Christians have rarely, if ever, even thought about. But now, like I said, 700,000 nearly Christians coming and ascending the Mount per year. And many of them starting to discover the holiness of the site and not just going the Muslim route where you play soccer on the holy areas or where you just, run around up there, but start reverencing the site. Another question for Christians: if Israel is still special to God, if you reject replacement theology and the land of Israel is still the chosen land and the Jewish people are still the chosen people in the Bible, then why, and Jerusalem is still the chosen city and still special to God, why is not Mount Moriah, Mount Zion, the Temple Mount, the same, still holy to God? It is, in my view.
I think it's important to just to preface what John was just saying by explaining that for those that haven't been here, the Temple Mount is a very, very huge platform, which is surrounded by retaining walls that were built by Herod. And this platform is much, much larger than the actual temple itself. So there's different areas within the temple. We're not going to go into too much detail right now, but the areas of the temple itself are restricted to certain people, even amongst with Jews, like John mentioned, there's certain tribes of Jews that are allowed to go to certain places under certain circumstances. Other Jews have to be purified first. They have to go to a ritual bath and they have to take off their shoes. There's all sorts of things that have to be done in order to have respect for the place. But that area, when you go on the what John would probably refer to as the Jewish routes, as opposed to the Muslim route, that area is completely circumvented. So you're basically doing a perimeter around where the temple was. You're on the Temple Mount, but you're not where the temple actually stood. You're going around that area as to avoid going in areas which are forbidden.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
I remember my first time up to Temple Mount. The second thing that impressed me about the place was it was huge, and there's so much empty spaces. They planted orchards where there never were orchards just to take up space. There's plenty of room up there really to be a house of prayer for all nations. That's the second thing. The first thing that impressed me was like I had to recalibrate my holy meter. It was just the place glows. It was just
it's amazing. I mean, you look at it and it's like 35 acres. It's very large, especially in the old city, which is very cramped. It's a huge part of the old city. And the thing is, I think that Christians need to really start thinking about walking the Jewish route, which I think should be the Jewish route and the route of all Christians in solidarity with both the Bible and the Jewish people, to walk that route. And, it's like, it's an amazing place to be. I love taking people up there and explaining the amount of history and the holiness of the place and the future that it has. I mean, you can just crack any part of prophecy and see that on this mountain, God will restore humanity to himself, essentially. That's the destiny of the mountain itself. It's not just in the past history.
This is actually an inscription, which is, we found a number of these in Greek and Latin and Hebrew, that basically restricts Gentiles from going to certain areas. But this is already from the time of the Second Temple. It was already saying that there are certain areas which are restricted, certain areas which are accessible. And this is still, you can see this today. There's parts of this here in the Israel Museum. There's parts in if you go to Istanbul and museum in Turkey, you can see these inscriptions today.
Well,
this is so important. This is so important.
If I can, that's the aspect of Jews being a nation of priests. Our desire for the temple is, God forbid, not to be Lord and Master over the temple, because we're not Lord and Master. We have a function to perform there, a function to perform for the other nations, which is to be their priest. And if a priest needs someone to bring the sacrifice, he's not there for himself. He's not there to bring a sacrifice for himself. And so ideally, my dear friend John would come up to me with his korban toda, with his Thanksgiving offering, saying, my family is growing. I'm so happy. I have to thank God. Please take this up and do a little dance for me and sing a song. And I'll be like, oh, John, I'll be happy to do that. And I'll take it up, and then I can't go in. I'll take it to the Levite or the priest, and they'll take it in and they'll do what they're supposed to do. And that's how we'll serve as a nation of priests, God willing.
I mean, looking at Isaiah 2, looking at all the nations that and almost everyone can agree upon is the future biblically of humanity, is Isaiah chapter 2, of all the nations streaming up to the Temple Mount, to the house of the God of Jacob, to worship God. And what you showed with the archaeology, showing the demarcation where the courts of the nations of the Gentiles is, something that Christians should really think about, is that Paul in the book of Acts ascended the Temple Mount when he was supposed to bring sacrifices. He took a Nazirite vow, and he purified himself in the mikveh, just like you were talking about, Joshua, about going through the mikveh to go to the Temple Mount. He did that. And when he was there was a riot because people misunderstood his message about reaching out to the nations. They misunderstood it as replacement theology, that he was saying that Gentiles can run around at the temple freely. So he was accused on the Temple Mount of bringing Gentiles into the court of Israel. And it was a false accusation. It was not true. He had brought with him Greeks to Jerusalem, and they had seen him walking around Jerusalem with a Greek. And they assumed that he had taken this Greek man to walk in those areas that are sacred to just Jewish people. And it became a riot. But the implication of the New Testament is that he never did that. He would not have taken his Greek Christian friend into the court of Israel or the court of the priests or so on. Each one respected their own place without it being that you're worth less than me, I'm worth less than you, kind of attitude. Instead, we are serving in all our unique identities that God has created in harmony.
So you can see in this picture on the left side, you can see where the Western Wall Plaza is, and you can see, if you look closely, the bridge that leads up to the Mughrabi Gate, and that's what leads into. We're talking about the southwestern side over here. That's what leads into the only, as John correctly pointed out, the only gate that's accessible to non-Muslims today, leads into the Temple Mount. The Jewish path that is taken goes basically straight. The Al-Aqsa Mosque, by the way, is the silver gray dome that's in front, and then there's the golden dome, what's known as the Dome of the Rock, which is in the middle of the mount, and it's on a raised platform. And that area is where we believe the temple once stood. The tours that go up, the Jewish tours, go straight around the perimeter. They go from the west straight ahead to the eastern side. Then they turn towards the north, and they basically make a whole circle around the perimeter, not accessing the raised platform that is in the middle.
Okay, I hate to be the bad guy. But I think we've come to the end of our time. If you guys want, I'll bribe John to come back. I always like speaking with him. He's amazing. And actually tomorrow we're going to be speaking to his partner in Cry for Zion, Doron Kedar. And we haven't set the subject, but I'd like to ask him about the proof that the temple really stood on the Temple Mount, because there's a lot of theories. A lot of people who come to Jerusalem believe that the temples once stood in the city of David, downhill from there. And it's actually an aspect of replacement theology. There's a lot of questions about that. So tomorrow we'll be talking about with Doron Kedar from Cry for Zion. He's your brother-in-law, John?
Yes.
Okay, which is an interesting story unto itself. Doron's a very interesting guy with an amazing personal story. But we'll be talking about whether or not the Jewish temples really stood on the Temple Mount, where we say they are, where we say today they stood. That's what we'll be talking about tomorrow. John, I really can't thank you enough. I really can't thank you enough. There has to be an awakening. There has to be an awakening in the Christian world to the temple, because it has to be a house of prayer for all nations. If it's only Jews up there, then the prophecy didn't happen. So,
I agree. Thank you guys so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, John. You are amazing, and we got to get together again real soon. Thanks so much. Y'all be blessed from the Holy Land.